Now let us start with LOS 16, which is the firm and the market structures. Here we will look at various kinds of market structures and their relationship with the individual supply functions of the firms and the industry supply functions. Then we look at the identification of various market structures. And finally, we look at the limitations of concentration market by comparing various kind of market structures and their respective concentrations. So let us start. These four are the main market structures we are going to discuss. First is perfect competition, second is monopolistic competition, third is monopoly, and fourth is oligopoly. So this classification is based on certain characteristic structures of the market. For perfect competition, there are many firms which are selling and they are producing identical products. And due to sufficient competition, they are forced to produce the optimum quantity and to sell that at market price, which is the best possible price for the market. Then there is another similar market structure which is slightly less efficient than the perfect competition. Here also we have many number of sellers. The firms are producing similar products, but they are not identical. They are differentiated products to some extent, and because of that differentiation the market price is slightly higher and the companies are able to make more profits than the perfect competition. The third is monopoly, where only one firm is producing the product, so the buyers do not have any choice, they have to go with the same firm. There are very high entry barriers or restrictions, so many other firms cannot enter the market even though the profits being earned by the companies are very high. But due to entry barriers, many companies cannot enter. So the quantity produced is less and the price is higher in the case of monopoly. And the another cases of oligopoly market structure, where we have very few firms, they are competing with each other. Normally entry barriers are high so that many other firms cannot enter. And the decision making of these existing firm is interdependent of each other. For example, their decision making about the pricing etc. are dependent on the decision making of other firms. Now let us look at these characteristics of various market structures. Let us start with number of sellers. They are very high in perfect competition, many firms are selling. Similarly, in monopolistic competition, the number of sellers are high. In oligopoly, there are only few 3-4 sellers, while in monopoly there is only one firm who is selling the product. The next characteristic is entry barrier or barriers to entry. In perfect competition, there is very low. Any company with a reasonable investment can enter the market. For monopolistic competition, the entry barriers are slightly higher than the perfect competition. In oligopoly they are high, and in monopoly they are very high. So no other firm can enter the market to compete with the existing monopoly firm. The third important characteristic is the number of substitute products available. In perfect competition there are good number of substitute available who are identical to each other, while in the case of monopolistic competition there are substitutes available, although they are not identical, they are similar but differentiated. In the case of oligopoly, again very good substitutes are available, they can be differentiated since only few firms are providing, they are good substitutes. While if you look at monopoly, there are no substitutes available since there is only one firm producing the product. Now if we look at the nature of competition, in perfect competition price is the only parameter on which the competition is based, while in the case of monopolistic competition, in addition to price, there are certain features on which the company is differentiating its product. So there are certain features and marketing of these features become important in the case of monopolistic competition, while in perfect competition there is no scope of differentiation. So price is the only factor. If we come to oligopoly, again price is important, But along with the price, the market players are competing on the lines of features and their marketing as well. And in the final case of monopoly, price is not a criteria at all. Advertising plays an important role. Since the consumer has only two choices, either to buy the product of existing company or not buy at all. And finally, the pricing power. Since there are a lot of companies in the market, none of them have the pricing power. The market will determine the price based on the supply and demand factors. In monopolistic competition, due to the differentiation and specific features of the product, the companies have some pricing power. Similarly, oligopoly companies also have some significant power of pricing, since they are only few. If they are colluding, then they have very high pricing power. If they are not colluding, they still have some significant pricing power. And while in the case of monopoly, the power of pricing is absolute, since there is only one company, so very significant pricing power they have. Now let us explore these market structures further. So we are starting with perfect competition. So as we know, any firm has no influence over the market. Since there are a high number of firms in the market, no one firm can determine the price or the quantity of the market. So supply and demand are going to determine the price, and due to which the firm's demand is perfectly elastic. Here we are talking about the demand curve of an individual firm, not of the market. Since we already know that if the company is increasing price a little bit, the consumers are not going to buy that product from this producer, because there are a lot of other firms available who are producing the same homogeneous product at the market price. So suppose this price is P naught. If the company tries to increase the price a little bit, the demand falls sharply for this particular company. So since the demand curve is perfectly elastic for any individual firm, they cannot afford to increase the price because demand will fall drastically. So let us look at the characteristics of the perfect competition based on what we have discussed so far. The products will be uniform or homogeneous. Since every company is producing the same, the consumer will react to the price very quickly. The large number of firms, perfectly elastic demand curves we have just seen. Supply and demand determines the market price, or in other words, any individual firm does not have any pricing power. And finally, no barriers to entry or exit. Any company can come in, join the market, or go out. Now let us observe the mechanism more closely. So in the short run, the economic profit of the company is maximized at the quantity for which marginal revenue and marginal costs are equal. Let us see how. If we look at this graph, we are talking in the marginal approach terms. We know for the perfect competition, the demand curve is same as the marginal revenue curve. Okay. We know where marginal cost is cutting the marginal revenue. So this is the quantity which firm will be willing to produce, and in order to find out the price, we look at the marginal revenue curve, since that is the demand curve in this case. So this is going to be our price. So company is producing quantity, say Q naught, at price P naught. So since we can see below Q naught, the marginal revenue is going to be above marginal cost and also above average true cost. So this is the area where the firm is generating economic profit, right? loss. If our price is less than average total cost, the firm will experience economic losses. In short term, the firm can still minimize losses if the price is greater than average variable cost. So if we are able to cover the variable cost, we can still minimize losses, since in the long run we will cover our fixed cost. So if the company is producing till this point, the marginal revenue is going to be more than average variable cost. So the company can still minimize losses, and in the long run, once the fixed cost is paid, the company can start making money. Now let us move to the next slide. We are observing the equilibrium in the case of perfect competition. Let us look at the market first. So this is our demand curve and this is our supply curve. So where demand and supply is cutting each other, we have the quantity and the price. Q is the quantity, P is the price. Similarly, if we look at the firm's curve, we have price or cost on the y-axis. So this is the curve of marginal cost and this is average total cost. Since marginal cost curve cuts the average total cost curve at its minimum, at that point we are producing the quantity, this is the price, and the horizontal line is showing the demand curve or marginal revenue curve or average revenue curve. All of them are going to be same for the perfect competition case. Now let us look at the market curve itself. Say the demand curve shifts to the right from D1 to D2. So overall demand is rising in the market. That will cut the supply curve at a new point. For example, earlier the quantity was Q1 and the price was P1. Now the quantity is going to be higher, say it is Q2, and again the price will also be higher, P2. Now we can see the firm will start making more money in short run. Their revenues will rise since the price has gone up. But as we know, in the case of perfect competition, the entry barrier is low, and if the prospective players see that there is an opportunity in the market, then a lot of other firms will join the market and they will increase the supply. So once a lot of other firms are joining, they will shift the supply curve leftwards. The supply curve will shift rightwards. This is the new supply curve and it will cut at a place where we are generating the new quantity as demanded by the new demand curve D2, but the price is going to be the same, P1. So as we see, the price is not going to rise because of the rise in demand. Since there are very few entry barriers, new companies will join, provide the needed supply, and the price is going to be the same, so that no firm is going to earn abnormal profit. So quantity will increase, but the price will remain the same for an individual firm. Now let us move to the next slide. Now let us look at the supply curves. For the industry, the supply curve is going to be upward sloping like this, which says for a higher price, the industry will supply higher quantity. Since the price is higher, more and more companies will join the market and they will provide respective quantities, and overall quantity in the industry will rise since the price is higher. Now look at the firm's supply curve. As we know, the marginal cost curve will cut average variable cost and average total cost curve at their minimum. So if the demand curve says that the price is P naught, then this price is just sufficient to cover the average variable cost and not the average total cost. The company will suffer loss, but it will not close down since the variable cost is being covered. If the price is between P0 and P1, P1 is the cost where our average total cost is being covered. So if the price is between P0 and P1, the variable cost is covered and to some extent fixed costs are covered but not full. So the company can stay in the market and wait until fixed cost is covered. And third case is if the price is more than P1 given the market, both variable and fixed costs are covered and the company can make profits. Now let us move to the next slide. We are observing the short-run increase in the demand in the case of perfect competition. Let us look at the industry first. Say earlier the demand curve was D1 and the supply curve is given as, say the demand curve shifts to D2. Say due to some reason the demand of that particular product in the industry is rising. So due to that it cuts the supply curve at this point for the new quantity and the new price. So now because of the increased quantity here, the individual firm can increase the quantity to Q2. Individual firm can demand price P2. So their profit will increase in short run. But we have already seen what happens in the long run. Because of this permanent increase in demand, there is a profit making opportunity, and since it's a perfect competition, other firms are joining and then they are shifting the supply curve rightwards, S2. So the quantity again shifts from Q2 to Q3 and the price is same. Now we know the quantity is more since there are more companies. They are producing at the same price as earlier. But the individual quantity produced by single firm will again come down to Q1. And the price as we know is going to be P1. So as we notice, there will be no impact on an individual firm in the long run due to a permanent increase in the demand. Since other firms are joining, they just distribute the new profit. So net profit per company is going to be the same. So this was about the perfect competition. Now let us move to another cases of market structure. The second one, which is monopolistic competition. As we have already seen that this is a variation of perfect competition. Again, we have many independent firms in the industry. Every company has very small market share, so no individual company can control the prices. Here the companies can make some profit, so they work on the average price, not on the marginal price of the market. And artificially raising the price or collusion is not possible since there are a large number of players in the market. So collusion is not possible. So in order to have certain control over the price, the firms produce differentiated products. So unlike in the case of perfect competition where we had homogeneous or uniform products, in the case of monopolistic competition we have differentiated products. So our demand curve is downward sloping, although it is still highly elastic but not perfectly elastic, which was the case in perfect competition where our demand curve was horizontal, perfectly elastic. This was perfect competition. While in the case of monopolistic competition, our demand curve is still very elastic but not horizontal, not perfectly elastic. It will be something like this. Downward sloping, highly elastic. In the case of perfect competition, the firms were competing on the price only, but here in addition to the price, they are competing in quality and marketing. Since they are differentiating these products, so marketing becomes important. So quality is a key point in winning the market share or the quantity produced by an individual firm. And since we know the barriers to entry are low in this case, so it remains very close to perfect competition. Now let us move to the output decision making of the companies in the case of monopolistic competition. There are two kinds of output decision, one in short run, one in long run. Let us look at the short run first. In the case of monopolistic competition, the demand curve and marginal revenue are not same, which was the case with perfect competition. Here the marginal revenue curve is on the left side of demand curve, and the place where marginal cost and marginal revenue are cutting, they are determining the quantity, and the demand curve is determining the price. So if we see upwards, this is the price P naught, and if we compare it with the average total cost, we can see the profit in short run, which is like this. We are generating money more than the average total cost of the product, but this is not sustainable in long run since many other companies join the market to reduce this extra profit which is there in the short run. The demand curves is shifted downward for the long run, and it touches the average total cost curve here at this point. So this is the same point at which our marginal revenue and marginal cost are cutting. This is the quantity which was there in the short run, same quantity, but the price comes down. So this becomes equal to average total cost. Since our demand curve, which is determining the price, has shifted downwards, in the long run, the companies will not be able to make any abnormal profit. Now let us move to the next slide. The effectiveness in monopolistic competition. Considering that the market structure is monopolistic competition, the individual companies can make their strategy effective based on the product innovation. As we have already seen, they differentiate their product through product innovation, and that is how they are able to survive in the market. So this is the necessity in monopolistic competition. The companies try to create their brand names so that they are differentiating, and to achieve that, excessive advertisement has to be done by the companies. So since the product is not homogeneous, advertisement is required, and thus the companies are able to make more revenues than the case of perfect competition. So now let us make a comparison between the monopolistic competition and perfect competition. This was the curve in the case of perfect competition, where we know the demand curve was same as the marginal revenue curve, and the point at which they are cutting, this was the price, this was the quantity. But if we compare with the monopolistic competition, the marginal revenue curve is on the left hand side of the demand curve, and at this point, so this should be the point where they are cutting. This should be the point. This is the quantity, and if we look at the demand curve, we can see the price here. So the difference is the price is higher than marginal revenue curve, much higher, and it is equal to the average total cost at this point in time. So that is the basic difference. Here the price is equal to average total cost. This is what a company target, while in the case of perfect competition, this is just equal to the marginal revenue. So every extra product we are producing in perfect competition, the cost is going to be equal to the marginal revenue we are getting at this quantity. while in the case of monopolistic competition we are able to cover our average total cost. There is an extra revenue and profit available in the case of monopolistic competition due to differentiation of the products. Now let us move to another type of market structure, which is oligopoly market. In this case, there are certain natural or legal barriers which prevent the entry of new firms. There could be natural barrier. For example, the company has to have one type of natural resources, or the nature of the industry is such that large amount of investment has to be made, which may not be available with every other firm. Or there could be legal barrier due to licensing of the product from the government, etc. There are very small number of companies who are competing. The product may be similar or differentiated a bit. Demand curve is again downward sloping, as we know. The firm's demand curve is less elastic than the monopolistic competition. If we compare perfect competition, monopolistic competition, and say this is the perfect competition demand curve, flat. Say this is monopolistic competition, elastic, and then oligopoly, where we have elastic demand curve but not as elastic as the monopolistic competition. This is oligopoly. So we see the elasticity of demand curve comes down as we move from perfect competition towards oligopoly. Here the firms are interdependent with each other. So the decision making of a firm related to price, etc., influences the decision making of other firms. So they are interdependent. The action of any firm, they have their effect on the demand curve of other companies, as we just talked about. Since there are very few firms, they can have a distinct impact on the industry curve as well. So now let us look at the demand curve. For oligopoly, the demand curve is kinked. So this is the kink. At one particular price and quantity, there is a sharp change in demand curve. The slope on the left hand side of the curve is lower, and slope on the right hand side of the point is higher. Or we can say towards the left hand side the demand curve is more elastic, and on the right hand side the demand curve is less elastic. And because of that, our marginal revenue curve is also broken. On the left hand side it is on the higher level, and it is broken, shift downwards for the right hand side of the point of the kink. Now let us look at the reasons for that. In the case of oligopoly, the competitors do not follow a price increase by one firm. So if one firm try to increase the price, the other companies are afraid that they might lose market share significantly. So they do not follow a price increase, but they follow a price decrease. Since they are afraid, if they are also not increasing their market share by reducing their price, they may not stay in the market. Their survival might be at risk. So they immediately follow a price decrease. So in this case, it is difficult to know what are the factors which are determining the market price, since there is interdependency of the price among the oligopolistic firms. And because of that, we have discontinuous marginal revenue curve. This is the marginal revenue curve, which is discontinuous at this point. So this is the left hand limit and right hand limit of this curve. So now let me explain it a little more. Suppose this is the quantity. This is the demand curve. So this is the quantity Q. This is price P. in normal case, if a company increases the price by a certain amount to P dash, the market share which it will lose because of the loss in the quantity will be this much. But in the case of an oligopoly, as soon as one company increases the price above this level, the elasticity of demand curve is much more. As we see, it is more elastic, and instead of the straight line we see a curve like this. So this becomes our demand curve. So at the new price, our new quantity instead of this becomes this. So we lose more in the proportion of the market share. So that is why the companies do not increase the price above this critical level. This is the critical level of price where we have this kink. So companies do not increase price above this kink because they are afraid they might lose market share more significantly than as compared to the right hand side of the kink. Now let us move further. Nash equilibrium arises where two companies are reacting to the price decisions of another company, or there could be more than two companies, and finally they reach at one consensus level where all the firms are better off. So the choices of all the firms are such that no other choice makes any firm better off. So any change cannot make their condition any better. So that is the case of Nash equilibrium. The strategic games model, they are the best choice for a firm which is depending on the actions and reactions of competitor, as we know in the case of oligopoly. So based on these game theories, we can find out what is the final outcome, which is represented by Nash equilibrium. There is another model for oligopoly, Carnot model. This model describes only duopoly. As we know, in the case of kinked demand curve, we cannot determine what is the point at which there will be kink. So what should be the market price? There was no mechanism to find out the market price. So duopoly model of Carnot tries to explain that. The assumptions are the products are homogeneous or similar. Only quantity produced will affect the price. There are no other factors involved. And the firms, they choose the quantity simultaneously. They cannot observe each other's quantity reduction or increase. And both firms have similar and constant marginal cost of production. They are considered to be similar. So now in order to determine its own demand curve, the firm X assumes that firm Y will keep its production quantity constant, and then they create the residual demand by subtracting firm's Y's quantity from the linear market demand curve. So they have the total demand curve, they just reduce firm Y's quantity demand from that, and they find out their own demand curve. Since it is a duopoly model, we know there are only two players in the market. So once the firm X establishes the demand curve, it can behave like a monopoly for determining its price at which it can maximize the output. And assumption is and the assumption is that Y's quantity will remain constant. Although this assumption is not very practical, still Carnot model gives us some idea where there are only two firms in the oligopoly. Now let us look at the conclusions of this model. It says the quantities produced by both firms change each period until they are equal. Since we already know that both firms are identical and both are changing their quantity based on their own calculations, assuming the quantity by other firm is constant, they will keep changing step by step until they reach equal. and these output levels will be Nash equilibrium output levels. So in the case of this duopoly, if more firms are added, the market price will move towards the marginal cost. It will come down towards the marginal cost. So the profit margins will come down if more firms are joining the market, and the market price will be lower than the monopoly since there are more than one firms, and it will be higher than the perfect competition where our price was equal to the marginal cost. So if more and more companies are joining, then our market price will move towards marginal cost, and once it joins, it becomes a perfect competition case. Now let us move to the next slide. Here let us look at the case of oligopoly where the companies can collude. Collusion simply indicates that in the case of oligopoly, multiple companies have the agreement that they will simultaneously increase the price and none of them will reduce the price in order to generate higher revenues. For example, this was the case of oligopoly. This is a marginal cost. This is marginal revenue. So this is the quantity which should be produced, Q, and the price will be P. If more and more companies are joining, so this is the demand curve, this will be the new price, P. Still it is much higher than the marginal cost. This is the case of oligopoly where there is still a competition. But if they artificially raise the price, the quantity produced will be smaller. So this is for the case of competition, and this is for the case of collusion. If there is a collusion happening, the price will become higher and the quantity becomes lower. So this is an inefficiency due to which the companies are gaining and the consumers are losing. So that is why the government regulatory bodies make sure that there is no formation of collusion among the companies, and the competition among these companies are maintained. Now let us move to the next slide.